Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really taking a scalpel to the mental wiring of highly successful people. Our sources guide us past all the typical motivation posters and, right into the cold, hard psychology of it all.
Right. We're not just talking about having money.
No, exactly. It's about the specific, often very counterintuitive mindset you need to build and, I guess, sustain that kind of extraordinary success over decades.
That's the core of it. We've synthesized a bunch of sources that break down ambition, discipline, all of that into just fundamental human behaviors.
So we're trying to see what really separates that A-plus crowd.
Yeah. The precise traits they cultivate, and maybe even more importantly, the subtle cultural traps that they have to be experts at avoiding.
So our mission today, unpack why they operate so differently, identify the social currents that keep most people, comfortably mediocre.
And figure out how to cultivate the habits that actually lead to compounding long-term gains, whether that's financial or, in your career.
Okay, let's jump straight in. Let's talk about the less obvious rules of status and trust.
Let's do it.
So to start, what's one skill that successful people have that is just completely overlooked? Or maybe even something that the average person deliberately does in reverse?
It sounds almost too simple, but it's keeping secrets.
Keeping secrets. That feels so wrong in the modern era of, radical transparency.
It does, but it's fundamental to controlling asymmetric information. The sources point out that when these high achievers engage in what looks like gossip, their goal isn't just to talk, it's to know information and then to manage the flow of that information.
So you're saying you'll rarely find a truly successful person who's just terrible at keeping their mouth shut.
Very rarely.
Right.
Or respecting the counsel that's given to them. And the sources are clear. If the second or third generation loses that discipline, the wealth, whatever kind of wealth it is, will just go away.
Okay, so how do they balance that? This need for privacy and secrets with this cultural pressure to be open about everything.
They get that trust is built on reliability, not on just endless disclosure.
Right.
Trust is the ultimate currency. And you can't have sustained success without it. It's the foundation.
And you mentioned the sources break trust down into 4 pillars. What are they?
They are integrity, consistency, competence, and benevolence. And if any one of those is missing, the whole thing just collapses.
Okay, so let's take a tech company, for example. How does that apply?
Well, their competence is obvious, right? Can they build the chip, the rocket, whatever? And their consistency is about hitting deadlines, or at least being reliable in their communication.
Okay, that makes sense.
But integrity, that's about doing the right thing when no one's watching. And then there's benevolence.
Benevolence, that's the one that seems tricky.
It's the crucial one. It means non-self-centered behavior. I mean, if you truly believe your bank or your CEO is only acting in their own self-interest, boom, trust is gone instantly.
So a company that, say, sacrifices a short-term profit for a long-term ethical goal, that's benevolence in action.
Exactly. And that's what actually drives long-term trust from customers and investors.
That's a great distinction.
Okay.
Let's switch to a quick social shortcut that the sources say signals the exact opposite. Low status.
Yeah.
And that's mockery.
Yes. The argument is that all mockery is basically a silent acceptance of lower status.
Wow. How so?
Well, when people mock their boss or a politician, they're trying to create this cheap way to build bonds. It gives them a little temporary surge of power.
Especially if they feel powerless in their own life.
Precisely. It's an easy social win, but it signals to people who are playing the long game that you're focused on, quick hits rather than long-term value.
And this just feeds right into this modern problem of being liked versus being respected.
It's the same pattern. The internet has made likes the immediate, constant reward.
You can get like instantly.
Instantly. Tell a joke, post something outrageous, you get a like. Respect, on the other hand, is profoundly long-term. It takes years, decades of that integrity and consistency we just talked about.
So the problem is that our reward systems are now wired for the short term.
Yes, and it undermines the slow, hard work needed for real respect. It's interesting, the sources note that historically huge human institutions, think about religion or even monogamy, they were invented specifically to correct for the self-destructive short-term behaviors that we all naturally fall into.
That is a fascinating connection.
Okay.
Okay, let's talk about what actually fuels the elite. We think it's just this love of the game, but why are they always at it? The sources suggest it's less about ambition and more about escapism.
This was the most profound insight for me. True, sustained ambition is often not a positive pull, it's a negative pressure.
So they're escaping something.
They're escaping trauma, escaping a circumstance they hate, escaping the fear of poverty, escaping irrelevance, and that makes them self-fueling.
That is so counterintuitive. We're always sold this idea of positive visualization,
Yes.
manifesting success. But you're saying the highest performers are actually running away from pain.
Exactly. And because that inner engine is always running, they just don't need external motivation.
So motivational speakers.
The source is pretty blunt about this. It says people who need motivational speakers are, and I'm quoting, unlikely to be driven by that internal, inescapable pressure that fuels the top tier.
And in practice, their output, it can look a lot like traits of obsessive compulsive disorder.
It's that repetition of patterns, day in, day out, with no external applause needed. They are just at it.
Why?
Because that constant process, that system, it shields them from whatever it is they're running from. The ritualized training of an athlete, the daily reading of a top investor. The habit itself becomes the driver, not the prize at the end.
And fear is obviously a huge part of this, fear of poverty specifically. The source says people distance themselves from the poor, especially if it's seen as being poverty, through your own choices.
Fear is a massive, powerful fuel, but the best of the best, they convert that raw fear into something else.
Into what?
Curiosity. Think about adventure sports. They're terrifying, right? Life-threatening. But the engagement is fueled by curiosity. Can I do this? What's next?
So success is that mix. You need the natural attraction to risk, but you have to combine it with careful, rational judgment.
Absolutely. Without judgment, you're just a gambler. You're relying on pure chance. With judgment, you're a calculated risk taker. The successful person sees risk as information. The gambler sees it as emotion.
Which brings us to a huge cultural problem. Why is failure so shameful, so stigmatized?
It comes from what the sources call a perpetual fear-based society. I mean, we socialize kids through the fear of failing exams, fear of social judgment, fear of financial ruin.
So when your default state is fear, then failure is the worst possible outcome.
Of course. And you see this reflected in these extreme emotional responses. People either create gods out of people they admire or they just viciously tear them down. There's no middle ground.
And that emotional response, that connects back to risk tolerance, doesn't it?
100%. I mean, just think about moving your money from a savings account to a fixed deposit to actively trading stocks. That's a journey of increasing psychological risk tolerance.
A journey that most people can only afford if they have a safety net.
Right. The next generation often has a higher risk appetite because they know their parents' long-term stability is there to catch them if they fall.
But the sources do offer a kind of pathway out of this shame cycle based on historical patterns.
They do. And the pattern is pretty clear. Behaviors that were once seen as deeply shameful, whether you're talking about cigarettes or, various social identities, they first get converted into pride movements.
Right.
And only then, after that prolonged public advocacy, do they eventually just become normalized. So for society to really innovate and succeed more, the shame of failure has to follow that same path. It needs to be normalized.
Let's shift gears a bit. How does the modern world, specifically social media, complicate all of this whole validation trap?
Well, it's complicated because we've shifted from a more collectivist society to a very individualistic one, but then immediately added this layer of intense social media judgment.
So you're alone, but you're also being watched constantly.
Yes. And as we said before, young people with just a couple thousand followers are already showing the anxiety patterns of global celebrities. They're worried sick about what that small audience thinks.
And that constant pressure to be different, to have the perfect travel aesthetic, the perfect clip. The source calls it frying people's brains.
It's an unsustainable chase. It leads to mental fatigue, which drives these hyper-fast trend cycles like fast fashion or meme stocks. It's impossible to keep up with.
So you're trapped. You have to be authentic, but you also have to conform to whatever the metric of the day is.
And the deepest cost of pandering like that is your own creativity.
How so?
If you only focus on the metrics, the views, the likes, instead of your genuine curiosity, you lose yourself. Think of a great actor who starts doing cheap gags just because they get high view counts.
They might get the short-term numbers.
But they stop being a great actor. They've compromised their art for that immediate validation.
Which brings us back to what real ambition looks like.
Exactly. The most truly ambitious people, they don't have all these aggressive tag words on their LinkedIn or Instagram. They're just doing stuff, building stuff. Their drive is internal, not for an audience. They know the work itself is the reward, not the applause.
And we touched on this, but the current generation can afford to be a bit more flirtatious with their careers.
Right.
They can change lanes more often.
It's a luxury. That short-term approach is a luxury afforded by somebody else's long-term stability. The generation that needed stability had to prioritize settling down.
And the current one can prioritize exploration.
Right, but that can come at the cost of the consistency you need for real mastery.
Okay, let's talk about that path to mastery. Hard work is a given, but hard work is useless if it's not solving a valuable problem.
That is the ultimate differentiator. Wealth doesn't flow to the hardest workers. It flows to people who solve high-stakes problems and then make the solution easy to get.
Like a surgeon.
A specialized surgeon performing a life-saving bypass. High stakes, immense skill, you accrue wealth. If you're solving a replaceable low-stakes problem, you won't. You have to create something people are truly motivated by, and then just remove all the friction.
So the real currency here isn't money. It's knowledge. It's understanding. The sources argue that people who are greedy to understand the world end up with more money than people who are just greedy for more money.
Because money is just a scorecard. If you only focus on the score, you miss the game. Think of the legendary investor who spends 90% of his time reading history and science.
And only 10% looking at stock prices.
Yes. His greed is for knowledge. The money is just the unavoidable result of him understanding the world better than others. Inheritance might give you an entry ticket, but only that sustained greed for understanding lets you stay in the game and compound your wealth.
And that superior understanding, it comes from a disciplined method of observation and pattern recognition.
It's the total opposite of a quick fix. The method described is you observe behaviors and systems for months, even years. You look for the big, repeating pattern under all the noise. And then you have to capture the essence of it in one single sentence.
So your brain can actually register it as a fundamental insight.
Exactly.
And this is where we can use modern tools like AI, not just for answers, but for finding our own blind spots.
Right, using it as a 400 IQ sparring partner. So instead of asking an AI, is this a good strategy document? You ask,
what are the 3 catastrophic events I have completely failed to consider?
Precisely. Or you submit your interview questions and you ask the AI to rate them against the top 1% of users and then tell you why yours aren't as good.
That's actively using a tool to challenge your own certainty. I love that. The source gives a great example of this kind of pattern recognition, the link between climate and wealth.
It's a perfect example. The hypothesis connects countries with extreme weather to specific societal traits. They have to develop better long-term planning. You have to store food for a harsh winter.
So that necessity.
That necessity often correlates with less emotionally expressive cultures, less colorful clothing, and a huge focus on efficiency. And over time, all of that contributes to higher per capita wealth. Efficiency becomes the survival mechanism.
That is fascinating. The environment literally forcing long-term compounding behavior. This brings us to a final crucial difference: resourceful versus insightful people.
The insightful person knows why things work. They can explain the mechanics, the history, the physics. They're the theorist.
But the resourceful person?
The resourceful person just gets stuff done.
They're a pragmatist.
Totally. They don't think in obstacles, they think in outcomes. If the insightful person is explaining exactly why the bridge failed, the resourceful person is already figuring out how to rig a temporary ferry to get people across right now.
They're the people you want in a crisis.
They're indispensable. Resourceful people happen to the world. For most other people, the world happens to them. And becoming resourceful means shedding that shame and reluctance we talked about and just focusing on the outcome.
Wow. This has been a true deep dive into the architecture of the successful mind. We've covered everything from why being a good secret keeper is vital to why seeking likes destroys long-term value and the importance of being greedy for knowledge, not just money. I think the overarching theme is pretty simple. Sustained success requires choosing long-term, compounding behavior, respect, knowledge, understanding, over all the short-term, instant gratification stuff.
And that choice really dictates everything. We've talked about the high correlation the sources see between IQ, wealth, and power. So let's leave you with a final thought experiment on that. If every single person's average IQ score was mandatorily displayed right next to their name on a platform like Twitter, what are the top 3 second-order effects that would fundamentally change human behavior on that platform overnight? Think about it. Think about how that would redistribute trust, influence, and accountability in an instant.
And that's definitely an interesting thought to leave everyone with. We'll see you on the next Deep Dive.